All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are breaking down the official National Park Service Foundation document for two of the absolute most recognizable landmarks on the planet, the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. We're going to unpack the incredible art, the massive engineering, and the profoundly human stories that built these international icons.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you really look at the sheer scale of Liberty Island, you realize we're not just talking about a patch of land with a big statue on it. According to the National Park Service, this park's overarching purpose is completely tied to preserving international symbols of freedom and migration. These are physical spaces specifically designed to force us to stop and really reflect on some of the biggest ideas in human history.
So here's our roadmap for the explainer. 1. A foundation of freedom. 2. Liberty enlightening the world. 3. The gateway to America. 4. Preserving the legacy. And 5. Symbol versus reality. We'll start spatial and then pull all the way back.
Kicking things off with Section 1, a foundation of freedom, the park's core purpose.
Foundation documents like the one we're unpacking today are basically created to define exactly what we stand to lose if we fail to preserve these places. And the mission is stated right here: to preserve, protect, and interpret these national and international symbols of freedom and migration, and to promote understanding, reflection, and discussion about the meanings of liberty and opportunity. So, while Liberty Island and Ellis Island are physically separate out there in the harbor, they are totally inextricably bound together by this single massive mission.
Moving right along to Section 2, Liberty Enlightening the World, a triumph of art and engineering.
Shifting to the macro level, we're looking at a monumental diplomatic triumph. I mean, this magnificent 305-foot copper goddess was presented to the American people way back in 1886. It was a massive gift from the Franco-American Union to commemorate the 100th anniversary of U.S. independence. She stands out there as this profound, literal beacon of friendship and democratic government.
And the timeline of her creation is just a wildly rapid story of international collaboration. In 1877, Congress authorized the site. Boom. By 1884, the statue was entirely completed over in France. And that was thanks to the brilliant French sculptor Bartholdi, the renowned engineer Eiffel, yes, that Eiffel, and the American architect Richard Morris Hunt, who designed the pedestal. By 1885, she arrived in New York, and finally, in 1886, the whole shebang was officially dedicated.
But hang on, how do you actually get a monument that massive across the Atlantic Ocean in the 1880s? 350. That is the exact number of individual pieces the Statue of Liberty was broken down into. She arrived in New York Harbor packed into those 350 separate pieces on board a French frigate. It was an absolute, undisputed engineering marvel of the 19th century.
And get this, when you look inside the statue, you realize she's actually made of this remarkably thin copper skin. Actually, scratch that. It's not just thin, it's literally only 3/8 of an inch thick. This super delicate exterior is supported entirely by this crazy, intricate internal framework, an armature made of iron and stainless steel. It's the absolute perfect bridge between fine art and cutting-edge structural engineering.
Honestly, it's no wonder that during its massive restoration in the 1980s, the United Nations designated the Statue of Liberty as a World Heritage Site. They literally called it a masterpiece of the creative spirit of man. That carries immense global weight. It reminds us why this monument is internationally revered, not just because it's huge, but for the universal ideals it physically puts out into the world.
All right, shifting gears to Section 3, the gateway to America, the island of hope and tears.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark spatial contrast between the two monuments out there in the harbor. On one hand, you've got the elegant, formal geometry of Liberty Island. But then, on the other hand, you have the sprawling, complex, multi-building footprint of Ellis Island. It's completely different because it constantly had to adapt to incredibly high volumes of human traffic.
And Ellis Island absolutely did not start out this massive. In 1890, it was just a tiny 3.5-acre military fort. But as immigration just exploded, the government had to artificially expand the landmass through these massive landfill operations. They added a second island in 1898 for hospitals, and then a third in 1905 for contagious disease isolation. They swelled it into a massive 27.5-acre complex.
12 million. Just let that staggering number sit with you for a second. 12 million. That represents every single immigrant examined and processed through the Ellis Island facility between the years 1892 and 1954, before they were allowed entry into the United States. It's an almost unfathomable volume of human migration.
Today, the physical reality of that space is preserved as the National Museum of Immigration. The Foundation document points out that Ellis Island remains the preeminent example of a government immigration and public health operation of its time. The architecture? It was meant to completely impress and awe new arrivals. But underneath all that grandeur, it was functioning as a highly efficient, state-of-the-art processing and medical facility.
Which brings us to Section 4, Preserving the Legacy, the Artifacts of Migration.
So how do we actually keep millions of individual stories alive? Well, we rely on a completely monumental archiving effort. The museum collections hold roughly 390,000 artifacts and over 1 million archival records. And the contrast here is just beautiful. You have these grand historic letters exchanged between the statue's designer and the famous publisher Joseph Pulitzer, sitting right alongside deeply intimate everyday things. Immigrant inspection cards, worn-out passports, steamship tickets, the literal physical items that families clutched in their hands as they arrived.
And finally, Section 5, Symbol versus Reality, the Interpretive Themes. Okay, this is where we analyze the truly complex legacy of these sites. The Park Service highlights a really profound thematic contrast here. You have the idealized symbolism, the towering notions of liberty, freedom, and economic opportunity that these structures project. But then you set that against the reality. And this brilliantly illustrates the inherent tension of actually applying those soaring, perfect ideals within a messy, functioning democratic society. It isn't a simple fairy tale, right? It's a complicated, ever-evolving record of how the United States has wrestled with its own core values over the last century and a half.
The Foundation document heavily notes the continuing, powerful connections between immigrant families and Ellis Island today. So I'll leave you with a question to chew on. How does your own family history connect to the evolving meaning of liberty today? Whether your ancestors walked through those very halls or your story took a completely different path entirely, these monuments challenge all of us to reflect on the opportunities we have right now. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking questions.